Hello and welcome to Countdown to Power with me, Graeme Pryce. The Right Honourable Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, eh? On the 11th of May 2010, David Cameron became the first Conservative Prime Minister in 13 years. The first in a series of increasingly disappointing idiots and lunatics that the Tories would make Prime Minister over the next 14 years. David Cameron was the first smiling, shiny-faced king of the sty that, together with George Osborne and a massive sense of entitlement, led the way to the trough for every other greedy Tory pig that would come behind him. The mess that was the very strong and stable Theresa May came after him, followed by Ballbag Johnson. Thick Lizzie had a go at being Prime Minister, but she was so shite she was outlasted by a lettuce, and then we got lumbered with little Rishi delivering Sunak. Compared with that shower of misfits and morons, David Cameron actually looks quite honourable and sane through rose-tinted glasses. Thing is, though, for his first few years, the country was still benefiting from the society that Labour had built. Some would say that the UK peaked when it held the 2012 Olympics and has gone downhill from that point onwards. I'm tempted to agree. So let's have a little look at some of the mayhem that Britain went through under the stewardship of Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, right after this. Hey, sorry to interrupt, just a quick interjection. The best way to help the channel and beat the algorithms is to hit the like button, leave a comment when we're done, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you really want to help the channel, then hit the join button below or make a donation through PayPal or buy me a coffee. The links are in the description box. It's all very much appreciated indeed. Thank you. You may recall that there was a financial crisis in 2008, just 2 years before the Tories took office, and starting as dishonestly as they intended to go on, they immediately used that as an excuse to convince the public that we needed sweeping austerity measures to recover from the mess that Labour had left. Cameron's giant shiny face was everywhere telling us that we're all in it together or we should tighten our belts as a nation. Remember the hugger-hoodie thing? Except that we weren't all in it together, because austerity basically had no effect on the wealthy. Lord Cameron had made sure of that, and it turned out to be only the literal most poorest people in society that actually had to tighten the belts. Huge cuts were made to public services and the welfare system, but we were supposed to think that was alright, because education and the NHS had been ring-fenced. Matt Hancock, or Twat Wanksock as I like to call him, showed us just how seriously cabinet level ministers take their commitment to ring fencing things, didn't he? The welfare system, the actual money that the most unfortunate, unlucky and sometimes disabled people have to live on, that wasn't ring fenced though now, and with the assistance of the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and the likes, and the liberal use of the word scrounger, feckless or work shy, David Cameron's government managed to convince half of Britain that people on benefits deserved literally fuck all and should just be grateful that they weren't starving in the street. The University of Glasgow put out the results of a study about a year ago and found that there were over 330,000 excess deaths in the UK between 2011 and 2019 as a direct result of poverty, isolation, poor health and suicide attributed to austerity measures. Measures put in place directly by David Cameron's government. Doesn't seem quite so moderate anymore, does he? David Cameron made a promise to the British public in January of 2013 to hold an in-out referendum on the UK's membership of the European Union if the Conservatives were granted a majority at the next general election. Well, one awkward picture of Ed Miliband eating a bacon butty and the pitifully pathetic failure of our journalists to hold any of the Tories to account, and eventually he got his majority. It's likely that he didn't actually expect to win a majority though. He was probably looking at the absolute state that George Osborne and Ian Duncan Smith had left the country in with austerity and welfare reform, and thinking he had no chance of getting away with it all. He did get away with it all though, and as promised, the referendum was held in June of 2016. Before the Leave campaign started on its grand mission of bullshit, the UK's membership of the EU wasn't particularly an issue on the radar of most people. Nigel Farage was screaming from the shores of Dover though, and the extreme right of the Conservative Party were becoming more concerned that UKIP might take some of their seats. It started to become an issue as more and more right-wing sources made sure their readers were sat there with red raw gammon faces reading about how the EU was an evil institution over their cornflakes in the morning. All the while, Mr Cameron, the original gammon-faced goon, was dashing all over Europe, trying his best to get them to offer him something that he could use to combat the bullshit and twattery being spread all over the country by Nigel Farage, Douglas Carswell, Boris Johnson and that guy who owns all the Wetherspoons whose face looks a bit like a sunburned ball bag. He utterly failed though, and I woke up in a sweaty tent in Glastonbury the day after the referendum, only to hear some pissed up dickhead going around all the tents telling everybody who listened, "We won! We've done it! We're out!" I think he thought it was something to celebrate. Maybe to him it was. Google later reported that the most searched term that morning from UK servers was, "What is the European Union?" Fucking hell. You'd have thought that being Prime Minister and the generous salary that goes with it would be enough achievement and prestige for anyone, but not so for our Lord Hammering. It seems like he didn't think he was bringing home quite enough bacon during his time as Prime Minister, so he had a nice little arrangement with one of his senior advisors, Lex Greensill. Mr Greensill was given above average access to up to 11 government departments between 2011 and 2016. Lex was also the owner of a company called Greensill Capital. Apparently he wasn't very good at running his company though, because he decided to hire David Cameron as his special advisor in 2018 after he'd left office. There's been information released since that suggests David Cameron made upwards of £60 million from his involvement with Lex Greensill. That's a name that sounds like a supervillain if ever I've heard one, isn't it? Apparently our Dave isn't very good at giving advice either though, as in 2020, during the pandemic, Greensill Capital was on the verge of declaring insolvency. Lex had a friend in Dave though, and Mr Cameron got straight onto WhatsApp and onto the then Chancellor Rishi Sunak and tried to suggest he change the rules of the COVID Corporate Financing Facility, the body that was intended to provide loans for companies to help them through the pandemic, so Greensill could have a nice big helping of taxpayers' money to help them through as well. Bear in mind, Greensill's insolvency was as a result of their actions before the pandemic had even started. Surprisingly enough, little Rishi refused, so it was probably just because he couldn't think of a way to get away with it rather than for any altruistic reasons. During his time working for Mr Greensill, David Cameron earned over £1 million a year just for 25 days work a year. It's nice work if you can get it, innit? Apparently, no lobbying rules were broken though, and there's nothing unusual to see. As always, we should just move on. Though the Special Fraud Office hasn't moved on, and Cameron, Greensill and other associated companies are still being investigated with regard to charges of serious fraud, fraudulent trading and money laundering. Dodgy Dave, eh? Starting to get a bit samey, these voting record sections, aren't they? I'm pretty sure Cameron is the first of these Tory twats I've looked at that was around long before the Tories actually took office, so you'd expect him to have a massive voting record, wouldn't you? Surprisingly enough, he actually hasn't. When I was looking for all the usual evil Tory shite, the most common thing I noticed was absences. Many absences. I also noticed that he'd voted against a few things when they were presented by Labour pre-2010, and then changed his vote once the Tories were in power, once again proving that Tory party unity is and always will be more important to the Conservatives than the country ever was. He is Ian Duncan Smith's mate though, and he is a Tory after all, so he went ahead and voted 21 times to reduce welfare benefits. We were all in it together so much that he decided the poorest people in the country should be made even poorer 21 times. He missed 33 votes on that one though, so he must have been out of the country quite a lot, or he just couldn't be arsed. He also voted against welfare benefits being raised in line with prices and inflation. Just think about that for a moment. He voted for that knowing it would mean that the poorest and most disabled people in the country would get less for their money. So it's basically another benefit cut by stealth. He repeatedly voted for the bedroom tax as well. What a surprise. And what a guy. Ugh. Well, we've got to mention it, haven't we? Conservative Party donor Lord Ashcroft wrote a biography of David Cameron in 2015, which contained a series of interesting allegations. He revealed that Lord Cameron was a member of a very exclusive club called the Piers Gaveston Society during his university years. The secretive society was founded in 1977 and encourages excess, high camp and ostentatious decadence. We already knew Cameron was a member of the Bullingdon Club along with Bullbag Johnson, but the Piers Gaveston Society was even more excessive apparently. So excessive, in fact, that its members were often presented with high-class banquets. And believe me, we aren't talking about 50 quid worth of parsley platters and a prawn ring with Mary Rose sauce from the Iceland here. No. We're talking about the kind of banquets with much more impressive centerpieces. Maybe an elegant swan made out of spun sugar, or a decadent replica of the crown made by the finest pastry chefs in London. Or maybe a beautifully dressed and prepared pig's head. I'm not sure if you still stick an apple in the mouth. I don't get invited to very many upper-class medieval banquets in London. But if they do, and the ghost of that pig was looking down, I bet he wishes they'd just left it at the apple. Apparently, a serving MP at the time is said to have given Lord Ashcroft some photographs or copies of photographs when he was researching his book, one of which showed Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton with a certain part of his anatomy inserted in a dead pig's head's mouth. You look at David Cameron now, and the parts of him that you can see are so gross, shiny, sweaty and gammony that I can't begin to imagine what he looked like in the 90s, pissed on champagne, off his box on Posh Charlie and waving his wang about at a dinner party for entitled arrogant bullies. And apparently, he was encouraged to wear excessive drag or fetish gear when attending Piers Gaveston Society events also. Obviously, Cameron's denied all this, but he's a Tory, isn't he, so he'll be lying. It's either totally true, or there's a thread of truth in it. Either way, I certainly don't want to see the evidence. Thank you for watching if you've gotten this far. Believe me, it was not easy to narrow it down to 5 reasons. Partly because he's been around for so long, and partly because he's just such an arrogant cock. I think a lot of the worst things Cameron did have been overshadowed by the sheer awfulness of Boris Johnson's tenure and Liz Truss's utter uselessness. But when doing a bit of research on him, my memory was refreshed of so many nasty things he'd done and said. Horrible, horrible, greedy man. Got a laugh though, haven't you? And if you've had a giggle with me, then do remember to hit the like and subscribe button. It does help loads and it's very much appreciated. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know, and everybody else, if there's a particular reason you hated David Cameron. Or who knows, maybe you liked him. He's dodgy and he's duplicitous, but he's not as downright disgusting and obnoxious as Badenoch or Braverman. And he's in a different league than Gullis, isn't he? He seems to be the only reasonably competent member of the whole Tory party at the moment, and he has received some praise for his work as Foreign Secretary. But let's be honest, an unplugged vending machine with no stock and masking tape over the fucking coin slot would look competent compared to the Tories these days. Speaking of coins though, if you do want to help the channel grow, you can find the links to PayPal, Patreon and the Buy Me a Coffee page in the descriptions box below, and the join button for memberships is just down there too. I hate to say it, but my hopes of a May election are fading. Rishi is just too much of a coward to go to the polls just yet, isn't he? But people are really angry and people really want a general election. Nothing the Tories can do will hold up the local elections on May the 2nd though, and the Tories are going to lose a lot of councillors, which will further release thousands more people from being under the thumb of the local conservative right-wing nutter. And that's got to be a good thing, hasn't it? We're still making great progress on our countdown to power. One awkward picture of Ed Miliband eating a bacon butty and the pitifully pathetic. I'm bloody pitifully pathetic at reading my own bleeding script. Dumbass.